Well, in order to be respectful of everybody's time, we'll go ahead and get started. So I want to say hello to you all, and may the 4th be with you. Welcome to our 4th Nash Cares Community Education Series event, a panel discussion on mental health and aging. My name is Robin Wagner, and I'm the Burt Nash Center Community Engagement Coordinator. I'd like to thank each one of our panelists for sharing their personal experiences on tonight's topic and taking the time out of all of their busy schedules to be here. This is truly just the beginning of this work, and we at the Burt Nash Center are excited to have you all here to be a part of this community conversation. Before we go on with the rest of our event, I would like to thank Ameritrust Credit Union for sponsoring tonight's event and invite Tim Mock, Ameritrust Credit Union's Business Development Officer, up to share a few words.
Thank you very much. I'll keep this very brief. I just want to say thank you to you guys for coming out tonight. What an incredibly important thing that we are working with in our community, and we have a great forum here tonight to express some ideas and wonderful thoughts on what we have. So on behalf of Ameritrust, I'd just like to say thank you again. This is a great opportunity for us to just be out in the community. There are a few takeaways on the table back there that you may have noticed on your way in, so feel free to grab a mug or a takeaway on your way out. Other than that, enjoy the forum.
So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with what you guys all came here to hear about. So I'd like for each of our panelists to first just introduce yourself. If you could say your name, where you work, and why you feel this topic is important. So we could start with Marcia right here.
My name is Marcia Epstein, and I actually work at 1041 Tennessee, which is where I live at. This mic needs to be like close to me? Yes. Yes, okay, sorry. Marcia Epstein, and I work and live at 1041 Tennessee. You know, when I have to introduce myself, I'm just going to say briefly, I think about how all of us have a lot of identities and a lot of experiences, and at any point in life, we have a lot of perspectives on things. And so when I thought about aging and mental health, and if you look at the table, I put these little weird things on there, and aging, I thought, well, you know, we all know we're aging all the time, as long as we're alive. But really, I think I'm going to say what we're talking about is what are our attitudes about old, right? I turned 68 years old on my birthday last month. And, you know, what does old mean? What are the things that go with old, which isn't quite as gentle as aging? You know? So I'm telling you that's my perspective. And with mental health, honestly, as much as I'm trained as a clinical social worker and do all kinds of, actually mostly with support with grief, suicide experiences, and with trans and non-binary folks, you know, when I think about not the words mental health, but I think about what do we really want, and what are we, if we're not getting it, what are the things that we do because we're not getting it. I think about what we all want is we want to have some joys in our life, right? So for me, I guess I want to combat that idea that older, aging, whatever words you want to use, doesn't mean bad. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Splitting this around here. I'm Jeannie First, and I'm with Project Lively through the Jayhawk Area Agency on Aging. The reason why mental health and aging is important to me is because I work with a population over 60, which is always an honor and a thrill, actually. And so old is kind of okay with me, you know.
Alive is good.
Alive is good, yeah, I appreciate that. Anyway, so my take on it is that every single person is so individualistic. And I feel like if you put somebody in a box, it isn't what they are. It isn't who they are. On top of that, I feel like there's so many different facets that affect us, such as environment, medicine, all kinds of things, you know, relationships, etc. So the mental illness part of it may not be an illness, it may be an actual factor that can be, you know, worked with, that can help that life be improved and help their quality of life improve. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. All right, your turn.
Thank you. All right, My name is Jason Kieser. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and licensed clinical addictions counselor. I work with Burt Nash Center here in Lawrence, Douglas County, and I've been there for about 4 years, been in the Lawrence community for well over 20, spending my time between working with addictions as well as providing mental health therapy to adults, which is my primary focus at Burt Nash. I work with anybody over the age of 18, and as we know, anybody over the age of 18 is aging. However, I want to commend what I know.
I thought
Yeah.
that you were eating.
No, I'm sorry. This is breaking news. And I really want to echo what Marcia said in terms of understanding what it is that we're talking about here. Probably is more towards the upper edge of that spectrum. And so when we talk about aging and why it's important to me in the work that I do, there are so many adjustments that we're expected to make as we age, and they're not always fully supported by the culture and the community that we find ourselves in. And so there can be a lot of alienation that ends up happening. There can be a lot of searching for where we fit in as we move into different transitions in our life. And so a lot of the work that I do is working with folks to understand that and to recognize exactly what we've heard over here, which is the fact that ultimately it doesn't have to be bad, even if sometimes it's scary to go through change. So that's a big part of the reason that I do the work that I do.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nana Dotson. I'm also with Burt Nash. I'm the Chief Medical Officer over there. The reason why this topic is important to me is because, to echo what the others have said, our population is aging, and as such, there's a higher likelihood that some of our elderly community members will face mental illness. So I feel as though it's incumbent upon us in healthcare to have a better understanding so that we can impart that knowledge onto family members and loved ones who are doing the caregiving.
Hi everyone, my name is Vicki Dick. I am a licensed master social worker. I work for visiting nurses, primarily with hospice, and I've been doing that for the last 9 years about. I've been a social worker in Douglas County working with the aging population for about 20. Like that number very much, but again, old is not bad, right? I have really appreciated my experience working with the aging population and their families, just to learn more about what to expect. And again, that getting older is a perspective, and how much I appreciate hearing the perspectives of older individuals that help me live my life more fully. And I think as a community, people as they age are kind of forgotten about. And I think that's a real loss to the community and a value that we can really bring, because there's so much experience in the older population. And I think isolation really impacts individuals and their mental health as well. And so it's important that we're talking about that and really discussing the impacts of older adults and their mental health on our community.
Hi, I'm Megan Poindexter. I'm the Executive Director at the Senior Resource Center for Douglas County. And so this is always an opportunity for me to talk about what we do at the Senior Resource Center and the important role that we play, I believe, that we play in the community, because it does matter to all of us. We are all either seniors or future seniors, unless something maybe doesn't, at least that's the plan, right? That we'll all be seniors, right? Or something else happened along the way. Okay. So it is really important to all of us, not just for our loved ones and the people that we care about, our friends and our neighbors. At the Senior Resource Center, one of my least favorite questions is, what's a senior, you know? And I'm like, we don't card at the door, we're not the sandbar. But at the same time, it is something that we're really aware of, because there is so much life that happens after you become a quote-unquote senior, whatever that number means to you. People can live 20, 30, 40 years after they might be considered a senior. And that is an awful lot of life to live. If you look back at what happened between when you were born and when you turned 30, there was a lot of things that happened there. And so then if you look at the last 30 years of your life, just as many things are going to happen during that period of time. And so really being cognizant of that and making sure that we're enjoying it to the best of our ability, finding the best possible quality of life that we can. And that includes how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our community, how our mental health is, how our physical health is, and all of those things interact so much. So I'm really glad that I get to be here with you tonight.
Thank you all so much. So I'll start us off by asking a few questions, and then I'll open it up to the audience for you all to ask questions. So if I could start with Jason, could you talk a little bit about what some of the signs and symptoms of depression or anxiety that caregivers or individuals can look for are?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. It's a great question. Can everybody hear me okay in the back? Fantastic. So when we talk about depression and anxiety, particularly as it affects people that may not necessarily have much experience with that, a lot of times what we're going to end up seeing is more isolation. Folks that tend to stay away, that might disengage from activities that they enjoy. Previously, when we talk about low motivation, low energy, right, you might see some shifts in terms of how they behave or their willingness to go out and do things. When we talk about the impact that those transitional phases in our life, as we were talking about earlier, as was going on over there may be difficulty in making connections with others, those social elements that are there that we all know are so vital, but they may not necessarily feel like they know how to engage with them, so there can be that isolation that comes out of that as well. Mood swings, when we talk about major shifts in mood, those can be things to be on the lookout for, which can be signs of mental health diagnosis, such as depression and anxiety, but can also be signs of other medical concerns that might need to be addressed as well. And so recognizing that when we talk about things like depression and anxiety, there is the internal mental health component to it, but there are also so many other factors that might be going on around that. I hope I answered the question.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Does
great.
anybody else have anything to add before I go on to the next one?
I would just piggyback onto that, working with folks that are mostly on hospice and terminal illness, a lot of those individuals, they can't leave the home. And so interactions are very difficult. And if there's a primary caregiver and family around, it makes it even more difficult because that's the only relationship mostly that they're able to see. And so that can really limit the ability to identify when there is depression or if there's not a lot of interaction happening outside the house.
Oh, and I'll piggyback off that right there. Because when we talk about depression in particular, we know that a lot of times people will start developing coping skills to address that, and they're not always the healthiest coping skills. So you might see some adjustments into some more maladaptive places. You might see more use of alcohol, more use of substances. You might see things like moving into gambling or gaming, those sorts of things. So if you see any major shifts in those types of behaviors, those can be good things to look out for that help you recognize what might be going on with people you care about.
I guess I want to highlight a theme of that distinction that several people have alluded to or said directly, that some of our responses are just natural responses to circumstances in our life, Grief can look like depression, but it's not the same thing. Feeling anxious because you don't know how you're going to pay your rent is not the definition of a mental health issue, of an anxiety disorder. And I'm going to throw out a thing because I've had a long time set of experience and training and ongoing with issues of suicide. And I remember talking to somebody who was very physically ill, bedridden at that point. And when she made this statement, I just don't want to be here anymore, I said the kind of thing I would say, which is, when you've talked about how difficult your life is, how much physical pain, how alone you are, and when you say, you don't want to be here anymore, I'm wondering what that means to you. And I'm opening the door for her to identify if she's talking about suicide. And she laughed, and she said, we used to travel a lot. That's what I mean. I don't want to be here in my bedroom anymore. I was like, yes, very good. So just a little reminder.
Thank you all. Marshall, while I have you.
You get rid of me.
How do you deal with the transition from being a professional to retirement and feeling that sense of that loss of identity?
Well, I haven't made that transition, so I'm not sure what you're asking me.
I'll rephrase you as people in general.
Well, one of the things I know, and again, all of my thoughts are filtered through the lens of that really dire position when people aren't wanting to live anymore. And something that I know from the research, I can tell you what's officially called Thomas Joiner's Interpersonal Theory of Suicide. Two of the things that Thomas talks about that lead to a high risk of somebody actually acting on their thoughts about suicide, about life not being livable anymore, they are when a person experiences themselves as being a burden, or when somebody experiences themselves as not belonging. And again, you've heard some things from other panelists already about how that can happen. And whether we're talking about full-on retirement and structuring life again, or we're talking, as we often are, about veterans and their experience leaving the structure of the military with maybe 50 or 60 more years to live after that, that sense of where do I fit? And so I think about that as how do we build a sense of belonging and a sense of being valued. And there are so many different ways that people might do that. When I had a big transition with a change in work, I ended up losing most of my previous friends that were local. Not the ones that we spread all over, but the ones that were local, because it was awkward for people. That's what they told me. Like, you think it's awkward for you. But anyway, and I ended up being sort of pushed in front of a mic to do a podcast. And that podcast, I changed it from what I was asked to do. It was on a local community radio station. And I moved it into conversations with artists about the personal side of their art. And at this point, 10 years have passed, and I have a huge set of friends and also some special events that I host that relate to art. And so my point is that that's our challenge when we make those big life changes, is how do we develop those communities that we feel part of in new ways. And so I guess that's my answer to that kind of a question.
Oh, absolutely, please do.
I have an adorable, I think I said adorable, and I meant adorable, 86-year-old mother. And when she stopped working after 40 or 50 years of her life, she decided to try all kinds of new things and see what would be exciting for her. So she did the, volunteer at the Lead Center. She did the let me host or be a monitor for the voting. I mean, she did just about everything she could think of. And she went on these trips for older adults where you could go for a day trip, on a bus, and go to her or whatever. And she had a lovely time, but it helped kind of explore her world a little bit. And she's such a fine example to me of how to do that, It was just lovely to watch her kind of bloom into, what she is today. And she's a lovely gal. I really enjoy spending time with her. And, I think it is important that we kind of try something new, It's not a horrible thing, but you have to convince yourself to do it. And that's the biggest challenge, I think.
And the new that you can realistically do, right? Right, yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I am not and never will be a trapeze artist. Just saying, throwing that out there.
Thank you both. Mickey, if I could ask you, so while this topic is usually centered on the individual seeking care, can you speak about the impact the journey can have on the partner, spouse, or caregiver?
Sure can. I would say anything that an individual goes through who has a spouse, partner, caregiver, that caregiver is going through that with them as well. And that person has just as many needs as the individual they're caring for. And it's so important that we recognize that as a society, and we make sure there are services in place for not only the individual for the older adult, but also for their caregiver. And we've done a great job, I feel like, in this community having some resources for caregivers, caregiver symposium and support groups at the senior center, and different ways to make connection with other caregivers in the community to find supports outside and to really decrease that isolation. But it is a significant piece that, you know, aging in itself is something we don't want to look at, and so we certainly don't want to look at physical decline that requires caregiving. And what the plan is when we need a caregiver, you know, what are we wanting? What are our wishes at that time? And the discussion around that is very difficult to bring up with our families. And so having a comfort level to talk about those things is so important and helps mental health throughout the aging process if we can be open and have communication within our family about what our wishes are.
What I just wanted to mention is one of my identities is I'm on the steering committee for NAMI Douglas County. And so for family members and friends, close ones of people who are impacted by a mental illness, there is a specific family support group that is led by NAMI Douglas County. It's free, available to anybody. And we hope that all of our loved ones who do have us or anybody else who has a mental illness also gets to age well. And so those people who are their supports, who may be younger or older, are welcome to participate in the NAMI Douglas County groups and the periodic family-to-family education program.
I think it's important to just be cognizant of the statistical increase in likelihood of depression of caregivers, particularly caregivers of people with dementia. There is data that does indicate that that is one of the highest levels of depression for caregivers. And so being cognizant and careful of the person that you're caring for also, but it really is important to be thoughtful of that and take care of that own need.
And I'll throw on top of that, just the additional element of validating their experience can be so transforming in terms of them then looking at all of this energy that they're putting outward for this person that they care a great deal about, and then they need that too, and finding opportunities to do that, which certainly is in line with what they're doing.
Thank you all so much. So, while I could ask questions all day for this panel, this really is a community conversation. So I'd like to open it up for questions. Carrie will be walking around with the mic if you want to just raise your hand, and Carrie will bring it over to you. Oh.
Tina's ready.
I'm ready.
Yeah. Is it on? Yeah. There you go.
Well, I think I have two questions about just being sad. People who are mourning and grieving experience a lot of the symptoms that were just discussed. When does that move from a normal grieving process to the point where we should be concerned about a friend because they have moved on into something that is more like a depression that needs to be treated? And then I guess I might as well give you both questions. The other is a decision to stop eating or stop drinking to end one's life when one has a terminal illness, and dealing with that with the person who makes that decision. And it's not, I guess it's a form of suicide, but how do people help people going through that process? So those are my two questions.
Marcia, do you want to start?
To me, they're two very different questions, so with that. What I will say about grief, some of you may know that there's a new mental health diagnosis that's related to grief. And what I'm going to say, and I brought my favorite grief book, which is called It's Okay That You're Not Okay, by Megan Devine, who's on social media as Refuge in Grief. The reminder that when we love beings, we are either going to outlive them or they are going to outlive us. And like everything else in life, how we experience that change with the death of some being, pet, family member, friend, spouse, whoever it is, could even be somebody who is a celebrity whose influence has been really instrumental for somebody. When we have loss, the way that we experience it is going to vary. For those who at some point thought they heard Elizabeth Kubler-Ross supposedly said there are 5 stages of grief, that actually wasn't what she was talking about. She was talking about the person who is dying tends to have these certain kinds of experiences as they are getting closer to the death that they will experience, you know? So what I know, and I've led a grief support group specific to suicide since the mid-90s, so a long time, and I've had a lot of personal experiences with grief as well. I believe we need to give safe spaces for people to express the feelings, the thoughts, the behaviors. And my way is to say, no shame for whatever you have needed to do to get to a certain point, you know, that we need to honor, even if it's been drinking, if that is what kept us alive, if a lot of casual relationships, if, you know, we're not wanting a lot of illegal behaviors, because we don't want people to end up in jail while they're grieving, you know, but I'm serious that whatever you have to do is what you have to do, and when we don't shame ourselves or shame somebody else for what they did, then it creates that opportunity to be able to say, I think I'm ready to do something different now, and let's figure out what that might be for that person. There is, from my perspective, no time limit on grief. What we aim for, and I love this image, I'm gonna show you, like, if you think about, you start out with that hand is right in front of your face, and you can't experience anything but that grief. And then it kind of moves out. And sometimes it moves right back in. Something brings you right back there. But that, you know, it's what I'm going to say is, I realize that something can happen and somebody can lose an arm. I'm being serious. But for most, in general, the idea is to say that grief is always going to be somewhere in your peripheral vision. It's going to be in your heart. You love this being, and you are sad that they are no longer on earth creating new experiences. You know, all these things that you thought were going to happen. Somebody dies, I am changed by the death of my loved one. The future is changed. They obviously have changed from a living being. So, of course, there's lots of impact. What I've learned is that when we let ourselves be okay with that, it is okay. You shouldn't just be able to be fine, my mom just died, you know, or whatever. It should affect us as caring humans. So there isn't really a sense of a time. I say in general, and Jason said something that really resonated to me with this idea. When we see people change in a lot of ways that are interfering with their life, and that's really just going on and on, that's, you know, I don't need to know right then, is it too much time in grief? Is it that something else? It's like, we need to kind of rally the personal support resource people together who care about that person. And then, yeah, sometimes they need to see a mental health professional. And sometimes, you know, somebody can also have whatever mental health challenge and also be grieving. You know, so there's no easy answer to your question, and to me that's sort of the beauty of it, is that we need to look at it individually. The one benefit that I've heard consistently from a certain side of the mental health community related to this complicated grief new diagnosis is that for some people it's going to mean they have insurance support to get help with their grief. But it also can be really stigmatizing because all grief is complicated. So I'll stop with that. And I know lots of it, especially with hospice. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I agree. Grief in itself is a challenge, and it's not just about death. You know, we suffer loss, non-death loss throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout our whole lives. And oftentimes people think that you don't grieve unless someone has died. And I think that's a piece to always remember too, that most of the time, even when it is a death loss, there are other non-death losses associated with that. I usually tell people it's okay to be sad. You're as much sad as you loved that person. If you love someone 100 and you expect to be sad 50,
It's not going to be like that. It's very equal, and you should anticipate that to be equal. If that individual is not able to perform daily activities, pay their bills, meet deadlines that need to be met, be clean, be fed, sleep, those are the things when interference needs to happen, when that rally those supports around that person, and that's when, as a friend, you would really want to intervene and help that person, get some extra support at that time. But very much grief comes and goes, it's waves, you can't anticipate when, and sometimes it's right in your face, and sometimes it's back here and you think you're okay, and then 3 months later, a year later, 3 years later, it slaps you in the face again. So being prepared for that, anticipating that, I think is really important for people too, because they think something's wrong with them. Why am I still sad 2 years later? Why am I still attending a support group and needing help getting from day to day? Why am I not sleeping still? I mean, all of those things are very normal, and just normalizing that for folks can be all they need to just be like, okay, I can make it till tomorrow and then the next day. So that is really important to make sure people understand too. The whole issue with stopping eating and drinking is a very difficult thing in my experience for the caregiver specifically, not usually for the individual who has made that decision. And it's kind of something that I've seen more in my hospice work recently than in the past. And even, I had a family in particular that this was, she talked with her daughter about this, who was her primary caregiver, and that was the choice, and everyone felt really good about it. But after her death, her daughter just couldn't quite get over not doing something and just letting her die. And I think it is hard, and she needed to be able to verbalize that and to understand that it's okay to be sad about that. And I think that's the biggest thing that we can do to support folks, is just validate those feelings and make sure you're listening. So, sit with people that you're concerned about and just be with them. You're not going to fix it, but you are fixing it by being there with them.
I will say it resonates also with the legal concept of medical assistance in dying, what kinds of things do we do? And for me, part of it is thinking we need to remember that we are all going to die. And I love what you said about the people who've made that decision to stop eating and drinking. They have believed that was the right time for them to do that. And allowing people to be able to make decisions is really important. It really is. And I'll just share an anecdote again. There's a woman named Peggy Batten who's a highly respected medical ethicist who actually has been on the pro-medical assistance in dying side for a very long time, and as part of a suicide professional prevention kind of international community. But when her husband, she blogged about this, and so I feel comfortable talking about it. When her husband had a serious bicycle accident that impaired him and the progression of what was going on for him physically prompted him to say, this medical assistance in dying is what I'm going to do when I make it to that time. And Peggy blogged about how even as she was somebody who supported that, she still wasn't ready for her husband to die, and how difficult that was. Not that it was a wrong decision for him, not that he didn't have the right, but she was honest about, yeah, we can know this is the right thing for this person to be able to choose to do this, and still feel very sad, like Mickey said, very, very sad that this is what it is for me, because I'm not ready for this person to die. And my brain wants to believe that if we only can do the right things, this death isn't going to happen. And that's not the reality, that it's never going to happen. So it's very complicated. And still, from my perspective, there's also the parsing out of being able to give people the space. Are they doing something? And I'm not saying that this is your experience, but overall, the sort of slippery slope with assisted suicide or medical aid in dying is, do people feel pressured to make that decision because they fear that there's so much of a burden, which is one of the things related to suicide, burden and not belonging, Or are they genuinely at the place where they think there is nothing that's going to help me have any quality of life for any significant amount of time, and I would rather peacefully go now with assistance or by doing the things that they have control over, not eating, drinking. We have to give conversation space, and we have to have somebody who can hear that. And the closest family members may not be the one. The hospice staff people may be the ones who can listen with less judgment, because it's not their mom, it's not their whomever, and they have made this dedication to families and individuals. So there's not, it's like with everything, there's not an easy answer, is this good or bad? It to me depends on the motivation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Carrie, Andy has a question.
While the microphone's moving over, I'll just throw on there, that sadness can also come out in some unexpected ways where you do end up seeing a lot of anger around that, and so that can sometimes be the first indication that, okay, something else is going on.
We see that a lot with caregivers. Anger is the first thing, and they think they just are overwhelmed and can't do it anymore. And they don't realize all the loss, sadness, shame, guilt, fear, all the feelings that are really driving that anger. So having services in the home, especially with someone with a terminal illness, is so helpful, just in having someone to make a suggestion. Because I know, for me personally, if someone says, hey, did you think about this? I'm like, I get stuck, in my tunnel vision, and it's helpful to have just some suggestions.
Yes, hi.
Your microphone is
I'm interested. Oh, is it not on?
There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is it working?
I think it might be running out of battery.
Yeah, I can speak loudly. I can speak loudly.
You can use this one.
Oh, well, thank you, Robin.
You're welcome, Annie.
I think this is a very fascinating subject about MAID, medical assistance in dying, because I know that Canada's really has a federal program, and there's actually a hotline you could call, and there's somebody you could talk to. It's not very sensitively produced. Apparently there's a lot of criticism about MAID in Canada, but it is a federal program, if I'm not mistaken. So how many states in the United States is it legal for medical assistance?
I don't have that answer. I don't know if anybody does.
I think 3.
I'm going to guess it's more than that, but I don't
It
know.
might be California, Oregon, and
Washington.
Colorado.
I think there's about 5.
Maybe it is.
Or is it Vermont?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not Kansas. Not Kansas.
That is not Kansas.
The reality, I think, as parents grow older, is that very frequently they're moved, either to be closer to children or just into a new environment like assisted living or something. Is there anything that kids can do, that children can do, to help that parent with the transition? Even though I will give the example of my mom, and we moved her up here from Hutchinson, and she came willingly. She said she wanted, but my sister and I saw huge signs of depression, and we tried to get her to the doctor. She chose not to. We even talked to the doctor about giving her antidepressants in her cereal or something. But are there words you can say? Are there things you can do to help that person live a healthier, happier life? So that's my question.
Sometimes I think it's important for a person just to look the other person in the eye and say something that they know that person would like to hear, So I think that's very difficult for us to identify, but if you're talking to somebody that you're so intimately involved with, as in your mom or your kid or whoever, you probably know them fairly decently well. I'm just saying. So I think that if you can truly get the attention of that person, then you have an opportunity to encourage them to open up the discussion with them of what are you missing? What are you looking for? You know, how can I help? Is there anything to help? And sometimes you just sit there. Sometimes you just sit and you are. That's it. And that's all they need, you know. So I know when you move someone, it's a whole new environment. They don't know the streets. They don't know where their favorite flower shop is. They don't know where the Starbucks is. You know, nothing. And maybe they're not even mobile enough to go out and about. But it's a new room. It's a new living room. It's a new house. It's a new garden, you know. So you do have to, I think, really pay attention to the person that you're dealing with. Observe them, like you were doing with your mom. Observe them, see the changes, see is there something they're missing? Is it their, you know, Sunday night chocolate ice cream? I don't know, you know. But look for something like that if you know that that's what they might love, you know. Then try to find that, try to make that discussion happen.
I think one of the things that it's really easy to forget is that a lot of the experiences like this that we have are really universal and they are ageless. As Jean was just talking, I was having a flashback when I was 22 and followed a boy to San Diego like they do and promptly broke up. And then there I was in San Diego, which is gorgeous, but when you don't know anyone, even when you're in an amazing place like San Diego, it's incredibly lonely, and I was very depressed, and it was very tough, and I wanted to come back to Kansas, and it wasn't until I found a community that I started to enjoy my surroundings, but that requires you to put yourself out there. That's real hard. And so the smaller your pool of people that you can kind of dig in with, or that maybe you have to meet, the smaller that is. And as we discussed earlier, as we get older, unless something changes, the goal is that we can continue to get older. That pool just gets smaller naturally. So helping that loved one, helping that person identify opportunities to find new community is vital and critical to success in that time period. I can talk more later about the Senior Resource Center and some of the other community resources that are out there, but that's the underlying theme is remembering that we felt that way ourselves. And what did we do? You know, how did we kind of overcome some of that? Because it's real common. I hear often what I hear you saying about the adult children who are trying to help their parent transition. And because you love your parent, you want your parent to be happy. And you want to give back to them what they gave to you. And so then you start to second guess, did I do the right thing? Encouraging them to come here. So, you know, at the same time, you're probably grappling a little bit with your own stuff. As far as that's concerned. So remembering that a lot of these experiences aren't really age-related, they're life-related, and so what are the things that I would want? What are the things that would work for me? And let's see if I can help Mom with that too.
I'd also like to add to that, just in general, normalizing the process and letting your parent or loved one know that this is a big transition and it's going to be an adjustment for you. And you'll feel sad and depressed at times, or you may even feel anxious because there might be friends that you miss back home in Hutchinson, and I don't know how long your parent lived back there, but there might be a whole community or the people there that she's missing. So helping the parent normalize that process and letting them know that it's okay to feel the way that they are, but then to slowly but surely build up that community for them would be extremely helpful. And it's also helpful to know, as your parent, not to minimize this, but know whether your parent is an extrovert or an introvert, and allowing them that time, if they're an introvert, to be by themselves and to take in all the changes and to process those changes. And if they're an extrovert, get them outside.
I did want to add one other thing as well that I think all of us love anyway, is to make our own choices. And sometimes we kind of hustle a person into the new environment and we want to let them be, and we're taking care of them and everything's great. You've got the curtains you like, but you don't like them blue, okay. I mean, we have to allow choices. And whether we agree with them or not, just as we were talking about with the assisted suicide or with the color of the curtains, I don't care. You really have to allow a person to have a choice. And I know that if I did not allow that to happen with my wonderful little letter, I would know about it very quickly. And she is a very kind and quiet person, so she is my introvert. I don't know what happened to me. It's a problem, but it's okay.
We have quite a few questions here, so I'm going to
So less than a question, I just kind of wanted to add to this conversation. So my dad had dementia for many, many years and lived very far away from me and was put into a variety of care homes by his wife. And I found that the thing that really helped with him when he kind of talked about all the reasons why he didn't like how he was living was rather than to try to be like, oh no, but it's nice, and oh no, there's programs, and oh no, there's all these things, is to say, yeah, it sucks. I know that this is not what you wanted, and this is not how you'd like to be living, but we need to keep you safe and things like that. And just having like an ally to actually be on like his side made a huge difference. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. That validation, I think, and that's going to be my theme word for the evening, is validation can go so far in terms of giving people the space they need to express what they're going through, and then give us the opportunity to hear what they're going through in a different way. And it does require us often to just let things suck and let them be rough and let it be hard. Primarily because, and this is the nature of the caregiver, or just the nature of caring about the people, is we want them to be okay. And part of the reason we want them to be okay is because that helps us feel okay. And when we open up that space to be like, oh yeah, that is hard, that is difficult, we're also allowing ourselves to experience that too, which is part of the work. So yeah, it's such a great point that you're making.
And change is uncomfortable. Anytime you have a change, it is always uncomfortable. To expect it to be otherwise is setting yourself up for failure.
I think there was a question.
Yeah, we have.
Sorry, right here. Okay, there next.
I know the discussion is in such a direction. This could be changing a little bit the direction, as Megan kind of touched a little bit. My question is, maybe it is a statement, that support systems are very important, and sometimes we don't have families close by to support and be there, either to socialize or when in need or whatever, just to vent it out or, I find it, I lived over 50 years. Some states are better than others. Why it is so difficult to get to know the neighbors? It's more touch me not attitude. If you see them outside, oh, hello, how are you? Bye. Or even if they have a conversation, that's very tense. And it doesn't matter, even if you are not old, even younger, because I've been younger, and now I'm old. And it's like, I just will share something. When pandemic started, it was really not even this side yet. It was more like in New York. And my husband passed away with heart attack, not COVID. Ambulance, police, and the whole cul-de-sac was filled. Not even a single neighbor, side, both sides, across, anywhere, ever knocked on the door. Don't even have to step inside the house if you are concerned with COVID or whatever. Not even a single soul came and said, sorry for your loss. So what kind of support systems we have in the society? How many people will personally help their families or make friends, especially if you are relatively didn't live in the neighborhood that long. But even after living 30 years in Kansas, I found the same thing, in next town. So I don't know if it's unique because I'm different and I'm unique, but when I speak with people, I hear it's same for them.
I think that it feels like it's glued down, sorry. I think that it's very true. Our society is a little bit different than what we wanted to be and what it might have, used to be. Used to be that you always knew your neighbors. You always knew who to go to for what,
Yeah, aunties and uncles.
And now we have to really figure that one out. So I would put to you, what do you like? Does it have to be the neighbor in your cul-de-sac? Does it have to be somebody that's just right next door? And if it is, would they be willing to come over for dinner? Would they be willing to stand out and have a cup of iced tea with you? It's very difficult to build those relationships. You're exactly right. But it's so important. It really is, I moved into my neighborhood a number of years ago, and we had two little old ladies that lived across the street, and they are still there. And I was so excited that they were there because I had some music equipment, and I knew it would never be stolen. And it never was. But they come out, and it's really quite humorous because one of them will literally stand inside her garage and lean against the garage like, you don't see anything, but she's watching. She's watching what's going on, So it is very hard, and I want to encourage you, to be bold and try to connect with one person, and then the next person. It's very hard, but I want to encourage you to try. Even come to the library, stand around with a book in your hand and see if there's anybody else that, maybe you could go up and say, what's that book you're reading? Do something like that.
I have learned, and
You probably already do that, don't you?
I have a dear friend, and she's right there. And also joined some organizations.
Wonderful.
And to get out and get to know people, and got into some hobbies that I wasn't doing when I was working.
Wonderful.
So yeah, I'm doing the best I could, but still there is something void.
Right.
Something that, I'm a people's person, not only raised in the society where whole community is your family type.
Right.
But, yeah.
I think that's amazing. But I really appreciate the senior center for that because they do publicize as much as they can of different groups that you can join, and it's such a wide variety. I got the newsletter and read it,
Yeah, that's on my next destination to check.
Yeah.
It's on my list.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, and I want to just address what you said about COVID. And when that first started to come into our community, the Senior Resource Center got lots and lots and lots of calls and emails, et cetera, from people saying, what can I do, what can I do? Because as you, I'm sure, recall, all of the information we were receiving is that older adults were at the highest risk of dying from COVID. And so they were being told to stay home, and right? So remember how just the isolation and the loneliness, and we're here talking about mental health and isolation and loneliness. We know there's new reports out, just yesterday, I haven't read it myself, so sorry, but there's so much data that we know about isolation and loneliness. The thing that I tried to share as much as I could during that time is that this is unfortunately not new to our senior community. The isolation and loneliness of COVID is many of their current life and has been for a long time. And so the rest of us were all getting this glimpse into what it was like for those older adults who were very isolated and had been. And the empathy that I heard growing during that time of understanding, because we were getting to all have that experience ourselves, was really exciting and really touching and important. And I tried to say as much as I possibly could, this is a friends and neighbors situation, folks. This is when you go and check on your neighbor and you stop at the mailbox and you stay 6 feet apart, whatever, and you chat, because this is how not only we're gonna get through COVID, but my personal opinion is the older adults, the baby boomer population, 10,000 people turn 65 every day right now. Our older adult population is growing so rapidly, and this is not a caregiver conversation. There's not enough caregivers to care for all of these folks. So I'm gonna just say that in the next 5 to 15 years, we're gonna see a really difficult situation for older adults who don't have enough people to help take care of them as they began to lose their mobility, to become more frail, all of those medical things, right? So as that happens, friends and neighbors are going to need to be the answer, because there's not going to be enough paid care out there, and people aren't going to have the money to have paid care. And that's not something our U.S. society really has done for a long time. This is going to be a very new experience for a lot of us, but it's going to be, in my opinion, the only way we're going to make it through this next couple decades. And so thinking about your friends and neighbors, and what can we in this room do? What can we do with our friends and neighbors that are isolated? What can we do when we know they're struggling with mental health? We can reach out. That is our power, our opportunity, and our kind of our responsibility. So COVID really shed a light. It opened this little window into this existing problem. My fear is that now we're like, woohoo, masks are off, let's go. Well, not everybody. That's not the case. You know, this is a lesson that we can really take to heart, and we can try to continue to play forward. And if you and I continue to try and preach that and encourage that everywhere, then we're all going to be so much better off.
I want to just quickly say something. One, I know we all thank you for being brave enough to share what it's been like for you, because that was huge. This crowd of strangers, and you said, this is really painful. And so thank you for being willing to do that. And I would like to say, so for those of us who don't already do this, challenge yourself to start smiling at strangers, to make a point of talking to somebody that you haven't already talked to. Those are things we can all do. And honestly, it gets me to circle back to Bert Nash, because a long time ago, somebody might know, but I don't remember when, you all brought in Frank Putnam, who wrote the book Bowling Alone, who had been documenting the decline of social connection for decades. So like you're saying, this isn't a new thing. This isn't just a COVID thing. This has been a trend in this country for a very long time. And we're some of the people who are here now, and we can do our parts to make a difference. People laugh at me because if I go to the grocery store, I'm gonna be gone a long time because I'm gonna be talking to somebody. And I've had wonderful conversations, and that's kind of one-on-one, you know, that may never happen again. But also I connected at the dog park with a guy who's a medical researcher from India, and we were corresponding, you know, we don't live near each other, but just happened, we were there at the same time. So we have that opportunity, and so challenge yourself. And again, thank you to Bert Nash in the past, whoever made that decision. Bowling Alone is the name of the book, Frank Putnam's the author, and the sad part is it was written a long time ago, and we're continuing in this country in that direction. Thanks.
I also want to validate what you said, because it's very true. And it's ironic that you said what you said, because the very same thing happened in my neighborhood right at the beginning of COVID. I had a neighbor lose their loved one. And hearing your story and what happened with my neighbors was the exact opposite. So it's very sad to hear what you said, but to put it more broadly, I think in general, I think what you were referring to was that the Surgeon General put out a list of recommendations very recently. I haven't read it myself either, but I did see a glimpse of it, recommendations where he essentially called isolation an epidemic right now in our country. And he put out this list of recommendations of what we can do, and it's based on rebuilding communities. And one of the things that he mentioned, I think, was each of us checking how we're using our technology and social media. And, you know, just in terms of that, I was thinking, you know, it could have just have been easier for people to call you, for example, if, you know, they were afraid of COVID. So that's just a very simple example of something that they could have done, and not leave you to your own devices when that happens. But I think more broadly, our society values independence and self-sufficiency. So when we think about building a community, it almost counteracts the things that we value the most. So I think that's one of the most important things for us to remember, that we may have inadvertently created this ourselves, but we can still be part of the solution. So I really appreciate what you said.
I can't resist just quick. When you brought up that independence, so there is this beautiful person who died too early, Stephanie Mott, who was a huge advocate for not just trans people, but all people in marginalized communities. And Stephanie wrote a song that was about bootstraps. You know, that phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, her song goes into, I would, but I don't have any boots. That's a lot of people's experience. We have to value everybody of all identities, not just ones who are most like us. And I think that's really essential to recognize not everybody has the same privilege and advantage.
I think we've got quite a few questions, so if we can go ahead and ask some questions.
Okay, I actually have two questions, and most of it is, well, both of them are based in resource options, I guess. I'm in a unique position where I'm not a caregiver, but I work very closely, where some days it feels like I'm the caregiver to seniors, and I am experiencing a lot of, like Mickey mentioned, the non-death grief of sight loss and the anger and the helplessness that comes with that. So I'm trying to figure out like resources, and because there's two different ones that stand out to me, and one, she has community, like she has family constantly around. The other one does not. And so her isolation and depression and the things that she experiences is kind of hard to watch. So like what, other than community, because I know that is a big one and we try to push that, but what if that person is already past that stage of seeking community, and what other resources would there be for that? That's my first question. And then the other question is more related to mental health. Same situation. you have family, but then there's a lot of people, especially in that population, some don't talk to family, or some are isolated from their family, and how do we prevent that or get past the denial stage? Because some of them are just, no, I don't have a problem, nothing's wrong with me, or they have family that is there, and that family or caregiver is trying to keep prolonging things when, I mean, if it's dementia, then it's dementia, and what resources or where can I point them to get help for those?
I think that one of the hardest things for all of us to accept is the element. Mickey and I she and I were together earlier today also, so this is lovely for us. But the element of personal choice. And that is so hard, because when we have not touched on capacity this evening when we talk about our older population. If an older adult has capacity, meaning they are basically legally allowed to make their own decisions, they get to make their own decisions. And we may not agree with their decisions. And we may know that their decisions are not the best for them. And I hear your heart of compassion, knowing that there are things that could be easier or more joyful for this person in your life, and they're not choosing that. And that's, I think, kind of coming back around a little bit to caregivers, I think that's one of the trickiest things for caregivers, is that we can't force someone to do something even when we know that it's good for them, that it's the best choice for them. That's really frustrating, really hard. And so, when we talk about what I was curious about is, you said you've got two individuals, one of them has delved into community, and hopefully that is giving them a lot of what they're needing to kind of fill their bucket. The other one is, it sounds like there's some community out there and they're not choosing it. It makes me curious, what are they, maybe they are more introverted. Is there something that would be more joyful for them, or would give them that positive sense that's something else? And so the conversation that I think that would need to occur to find out, if it's not community for you, then what might it be? And start working on trying to find those things. Douglas County we're pretty lucky. For a community of our size, we have a lot of resources. We're very fortunate. Our county government, I'm going to give them some props. They've worked very hard to have a social service structure in this community. They financially support a lot of us to try and help make sure that we can serve this county pretty well for our size. But we're still a pretty small town in Kansas. It's a pretty small community in Kansas. So we're not going to have everything. And sometimes at the Senior Resource Center, it's a bummer, because someone calls us and says, I want this. And I'm like, this is the thing that would make my life so good. And I'm like, that's so bummer, because I don't have that. I don't have that one thing. We've got all this other stuff. I don't have that one thing. And so encouraging people to be open-minded about what might it mean to you. Maybe you've not tried choir before. I don't know what a good example would be. But maybe you don't have to sing, but maybe just being in a room where other people are singing might be really awesome for you. But you've never tried it before. How open-minded might you want to be? And so encouraging some of that broader thinking may be an option to encourage this person for. The Senior Resource Center, one of our roles in Douglas County is to be kind of the place where an individual person can come and have a one-on-one conversation about their loved one or themselves and what their circumstances are, because we are different. We do have different interests. Janet Eikenberry is here in the room with me tonight. She is our Director of Health and Human Services, and that's pretty much what she does every day, all day, she has these one-on-one conversations to try and say, okay, so this person's, we don't have that one thing that they want. Let's see what we can come up with. And that is, it's not a real efficient model, but it does work pretty well. And so I would encourage that. I would encourage, if it's something that you feel like you're coming up against a brick wall with that individual, to seek some outside assistance in that regard. And then really hope that folks can have an open mind to what is out there. we have a lot going on in this community. This is a very, very busy social community. If you want to go and do something, there is something to do. If you don't want to go and do something, then we do need to dig a little deeper. It's a little tougher and it's more individualized. Does that give you at least some pathways?
I just wanted to say, make sure you're having a conversation with that individual, because even though you think they're isolated, isolation does not always equal depression. Some people choose to be isolated, and that's okay too, but having that conversation is important, because then you're not running around trying to find resources that they don't even want.
You know, one of the wonderful things that this community has is the ability to connect with someone personally. And obviously, I think that that's always our first choice, right? To be interactive with another human. But what's coming in the future for all of us because of the boomers is robotics. And so there are a lot of insurance companies that will provide robotic animals. So you could get a little dog, a little cat. So particular people that are moved into an assisted living, they can't take their pet with them. The insurance company will provide them a robotic, a dog or cat or some other little animal, and it's under your insurance. So, you know, I would check into that resource. There's another robot called LQ that interacts with you. It sits on your desk, interacts and says, "Oh, Brenda, you know, you haven't listened to any music today. Would you like to hear Journey? Would you like to hear, what's the Valley Frankie or whoever?" Or, you know, if somebody hasn't moved in a while, they said, you know, "Are you feeling okay? Have you had some water today?" You know, so there's a lot of different things beyond our humanity when somebody can't get there. So I just kind of want to add that in. So I started to interrupt this.
No, we so appreciate you. Yes, I'll come back with Mike.
Let's see, I told everybody I'd be learning something. So that's wonderful.
Okay, I really love that. Especially because insurance is covering it. But does there have to be a diagnosis? You know how, okay, that's all I wanted. Thank you.
Perfect. Do we have any more questions? Oh, yes.
One thing that I think is very important, and I would hope that we would be able to provide, but I'm really not sure that we are able to provide it, is that a person that may have mental health issues or may have a diagnosis, severe and persistent mental illness, also as they age particularly, they may also be dealing with not only one, but many illnesses, and oftentimes they're invisible disabilities. So they may walk into Bert Nash, they may look fine, but they may actually have fibromyalgia or POTS or, you know, a whole myriad of these invisible, very debilitating, you know, things that are going on at the same time that the psychiatric disorder or, you know, trauma, they may have this complex thing. And I think one problem that we may have in helping people is that if the therapy is kind of narrow and just directed to, okay, this is your diagnosis, and it's true that person may have that problem, but actually the physical illnesses and the things that they're coping with may also be very debilitating, and, you know, facing limitations on what you can do. If you've always been a very active person and now you can barely get out of bed and get dressed, that's a lot mentally and emotionally to deal with, spiritually. And I think that's what I would really like to see, perhaps an improvement, a better ability to deal with people with, because that's just been my experience, that it's been hard to find assistance in coping with a whole myriad of things, not just one.
Yeah, I think it's so many wonderful points that you're making, particularly as it regards to those invisible illnesses and those things that may not be immediately present when they're sitting in front of somebody that's asking them questions about how often, you know, do you go to the movies or whatever. And so one of the things that at least Douglas County has shifted into is the CCEHC model, being the first in Kansas to be able to start addressing that more holistic need, where as a community mental health center, we are starting to include more dynamic assessment for those physical needs, as well as how that relates to the mental health diagnosis, and then looking at the social components and just ultimately trying to hit every element of that biological, psychological, social, and as you said, spiritual aspect of the daily lived experience. And so my hope, you're right, there are absolutely deficiencies within that. And my hope is that by expanding those types of resources and that type of funding, that we're going to start catching more of that and giving people more of that opportunity. I think it also speaks, once again, to the element of those transitions that we go through that we don't always necessarily anticipate, right? When I imagine myself, at 85 years old, I'm probably trying to imagine myself as I am now then. But the reality is I'm going to go through some changes, and I may not necessarily have a full, honest representation internally of what that's going to look like. And I might fight it, despite all of the reality of it, right? And so being able to find a place where you can be open about those changes and then talk about those openly and allow things to suck, and also allow yourself to embrace the beauty of aging and the fact that just because things are changing doesn't mean it has to be difficult. So yeah, just wanted to reflect on that.
And I just want to add to what Jason said. Not just being a CCBHC, but in terms of what you mentioned about whole person care and not just the mental illness. So, Bert Nash has become a CCBHC. We are working and making sure that we are increasing the person's treatment team. So it's not only going to include the therapist, it's also going to include if they need medication for their severe persistent mental illness, medication provider. And then for those unseen or unspoken of physical illnesses, we will add their primary care provider, and we will be in communication with that individual to make sure that they're taking care of themselves and taking whatever medications or whatever therapies have been recommended for them. So we are doing our best to increase that person's treatment team in essence.
Thank you. We've got time for maybe 2 more questions. Does anybody else have questions in the audience? Oh, yes.
I think we have a wonderful community, and I appreciate all of you being here tonight to talk about that, because I see that too as a person. But I also see what's happening often in Lawrence right now is the homeless population. And I would like to know what you think are needs for both mental health, physical health, and aging and homelessness, and what you feel like is out there that can help that population.
Well, I think I'm going to be brave here. Oh, go ahead. You're so wonderful. That is a one-handed middle.
I don't know that it is a real fact statistically that the aging population and the houseless population overlap is growing. And it has been for a while. And this is really not new. This kind of recent surges of conversation that we've had in our community is really behind the ball on that. And at this point, there's not, unfortunately, a good answer that I've observed. The Senior Resource Center has folks come into our building daily, but pretty close, that are seniors that are houseless or who are being evicted, and may or may not also have any mental illness. So what I'm going to unfortunately say, and maybe you've got something better to say,
I don't know. I can't read your mind.
There's not a good answer at this point. It is just as prevalent of an issue for our senior population with houselessness as it is with every other age demographic right now. there is not a special consideration really for older adults when it comes to houselessness. There's the additional burden of that many of them need some sort of ADA or accessible housing, and to find affordable, accessible, available housing is, whoa, the trifecta. It's not good. And so I appreciate that you brought the topic up. I don't have good news. I don't have an answer for that one, except for to say, yes, that's an issue. And it is one that whenever I have an opportunity to be in the room with the housing conversations, the county, the aging conversations, it's one that I try to bring up, but I've also been bringing it up for, I think the first time I really had a conversation about it was back when you and I worked together. So it's been at least 9 years, so.
Okay, so I'm gonna say that I totally agree. I am, that's where I kind of get involved with people, is if they are being evicted. I've had several people that I've worked with that they were in the process of being evicted, and then I had to help them find some kind of place that's ADA accessible, you know, it's safe, it's in a neighborhood where they can actually breathe, you know, and it's affordable. Those are so many different factors there that are so difficult to find. And I feel like as our community addresses the problem, it's gonna take all of us to address the problem, one person at a time. And and that's kind of what I do, is that I go and I learn that person. And as our lady was saying earlier, there's so many different facets, you know. We have a housing issue, maybe we have nutrition. What about medication? Do they have any? Have they taken it? What is it? You know, is the person toxic from their medicine? I mean, there's so many different things. And as older adults, we can absorb so much, you know, medically, and have so many things going on that it's hard to define it all. And then, oh shucks, let's throw in no home. So, you know, there's a lot of stressors that happen. And between all that stress and all of the mental illness and the physical and biological things that are going on, let's try a little social and spiritual thrown in there as well. We're so complex. And yet, if we can find one answer to meet that one need, that will enlighten and help another person's life. So that's where we need to be, I think. And I just pray for more funding, you know, more than anything, that we would have more housing, that we have things that will meet the needs of our community.
Thank you. I know we've got a couple more questions, so if we can start. Do you have a question?
Can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
Issue? New York mayor, you probably all heard about, he started a program to take all the homeless people and provide them places, shelter, whatever it's called. I don't know the more details about how all the needs of the person are taken care. I also heard there are some people who are criticizing what he's doing. So I think whatever reason they are homeless, I don't know, but
It can be a variety.
Yeah,
Sometimes
right.
They can't afford where they're living. Sometimes that place is just closing, you know.
So I think it's, especially in countries where developed, I think it's society's responsibility to make sure they're not on the streets, but they are sheltered.
I think we've got one last question or comment.
I just have a quick announcement. The organization Justice Matters, I think you're familiar with them. Well, on Sunday at 3 o'clock, we have our action assembly. And at that time, there's a discussion of a 5-year strategy to end homelessness here in town. And we've been working on this issue for 9 years, because I started with them. And this is something that's really possible in conjunction with the city if we work together. So at 3 o'clock on the Lead Center this Sunday, that's one of our 4 issues. And someone's got some tickets right here, and I do too. But, this is how the community can work together with the city on these issues that are so complex. So I hope you'll consider coming 3 o'clock Sunday at the Lead Center, okay? Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And
Tickets are free.
Yes.
Just for a count to know how many people were there. So free tickets.
Well, thank you all so much for this conversation. This is such an important topic, and I appreciate everybody discussing it. Before we go, I just want to thank all our panelists personally for being here. Share their wealth of knowledge. Before we go, I think Patrick Schmitz, our CEO, just has a few words to say.
Thank you, Robin. The concept is housing first, and we're going to try to achieve functional zero houselessness. So that's the project that you're referencing. So thank you all for being here today and sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience on such an important topic, and certainly one that is becoming more and more important to me as I age and as I watch my parents age ever so more. Thank you, Tim and Merit Trust, for your support of this event and all the things you do to help us get information about mental health out into our community. So thank you and your team for that. Yes, please. We are seeing an increasing number, and many of you have mentioned this, members of our community who are both children and adults who are reaching out for help. Burton Nash Center is committed to respond to the needs of children and families and adults in our community. We appreciate all of you being here tonight to learn some more. If you are interested in becoming more and more educated and getting more information, please consider reaching out to the Burton Nash Center and think about attending either a Discover Burton Nash tour, taking a mental health first aid course, or if you want to do something that is more of a physical thing, we build care kits for the people we serve, and just a little something to help them get through a difficult time, and all those are opportunities to be involved. Our next installment of our community education series will take place on September 7th. It's a panel on mental health and recovery. We at the Burton Nash Center want you to know if you or a loved one are in crisis, our treatment and recovery center is now open. Right now it's open from 8 a.m. To 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 12 to 4 on Saturday and Sundays. And it's to serve all Douglas County residents. And starting on May the 25th, the TRC, as we call it, will be open 24/7. So just, one of the things we talk about a lot lately, now that it's open, we'll be doing more advertising, but people are like, what number do I need to call before I come? You don't. Just come. Just come. Just bring your loved one. Just show up. We'll bring you in. We will figure out what the next right step is for. So we're really excited about that. Thanks again to all of you who attended tonight's event. Drive home safely. Thank you.